Okay, so hello, good afternoon. This is Monday Live, a conversation to help the AS industry get through the pandemic and figure out what's on the other side. That's really sort of our mission. And this week we're going to have a conversation about how to uncover best practices, things that we and maybe some of the guests on the call can chime in on. The panelists are the profiles are all on mondaylive.org, so we won't spend time on that. Just a reminder that the views that are being expressed in this call are personal views of the speakers, not of any organization or company. Please use the Zoom Q&A and chat tools to chat with us and ask questions. And please, if you can, complete the survey at the end. We're on mondaylive.org. So the conversation today is about best practices, as I said. And I kind of one of the things that this group has been talking about in the last couple of weeks during the last week, obviously, when with the Memorial Day, we didn't have this show, was really about the timeline of everything. And this is sort of a matrix that we've been discussing around. And really the concept here is that there's obviously a timeline going from today to some sort of new normal. We don't know when that is. We don't know if it's months or years, not likely to be months. And then there's the other dimension is the sort of the physical world, the stuff that's going on. People are trying all sorts of things, whether it's body temperature screening or sensing, all the way to UVC, and we've talked about that a little bit. And down the road, obviously all the way down potentially to maybe robot cleaners, who knows. And then there's other sort of broader things that's going on, going back to work, trying to sort of figure out how to do that, and questions that many people are trying to figure out in terms of what sports and entertainment and mass transportation is going to look like. That's obviously a little bit down the road. So this is the stuff that's actually going on in a lot of the industries that's sort of around us, around building automation. But our focus is really what happens at the top here, right? And the two sort of big question mark areas is really what is likely to happen in the short term while we're in this COVID uncertainty, as it were, and then what will how will things sort of play out in the longer term once we get into some kind of new normal that we don't know, right? So our focus, people in this group, is really about the digital side of the world, obviously around buildings. So I thought we'd just put this out just as a sort of a reference point to know what it is that we focused on in terms of conversations. So I do have a couple of other slides from some other people on this call. Ken is obviously just launched today the June issue of Automated Buildings, and I'm sure he'll be talking about that. His theme is researching and reinventing not normal. I'm not quite sure what not normal is. Maybe Ken can explain that in the next hour or so. So a lot of activity, obviously, on the automatedbuilding.com and as well as on LinkedIn and Twitter. Roger is sort of focusing on work from home surveys, and I haven't actually read all of this. It's just come in the last hour or so. Maybe we can go back to this when Roger speaks. And Steve Fay is talking about the health risk side of things, which again we'll talk about in a little while. So I'm going to switch this off and get back to the faces that. Yeah, we're all here. Well, more of us are here. So let me just sort of open it up to the group. Maybe ask sort of Ken to just sort of talk about his June issue and a little bit sort of backstory on that. Ken?
Thanks, Adam. Yeah, okay. This has been kind of building for the last couple of months in some of the stuff we've been looking at. And the further I try to figure out what's going on is it's, no matter how we come out of this, it's not going to be normal. It's not going to, everybody talks about normal, returning to normal or returning to the new normal. And I see that's not going to happen. It's going to be a not normal. It's going to be a situation we've not seen before. And that's driven by a bunch of things that we don't have control of. One of the big problems is just how do we attract the people back to the buildings? But, and we've got this great movement, especially by the software people, that they're not coming back. We've got another thing going on with mega cities. They've been hit a lot harder, and they have some more complex problems. We've all been poking at this remotely, zooming in and zooming out, and it's actually working not that bad. Some of the reports are its productivity hasn't really suffered at all. So now we're questioning, has all the traveling to these large cities made sense? And do we have to reconfigure into smaller communities? And so there's a lot of things. I'm optimistic that this will actually bring a much better, stronger relationships out of how this is going. It's definitely a lot of turmoil though. And I think if you're not kind of looking at the turmoil that you're going into, if you're trying to just keep doing what you're doing, I'm not sure that's going to work so well. That's my thoughts.
Anybody want to chime in on that?
Maybe I just expand on a little bit of what Ken was saying about the effects. I mean, the thing I posted up there about the survey was quite interesting. I only saw it today, but it was talking, they surveyed about 3,000 people, and pretty much about, if you take about the mid 70% is saying that everybody across the board, the management, the company, the people themselves are happy, that, you know, there certainly is more efficiency and productivity. And it looks like it's set to continue. And they brought in another little thing from Gartner as well, saying that something like 300 CFOs who were surveyed said they were going to, 74% of those said they were going to reduce their or review their estate because of the remote working. But it's quite a good survey, balanced. It actually looks at the demographics, it looks geographically, the whole thing, and I think it seems to be reasonably well put together. And so I think it's really going to back up, what Ken's saying. There is going to be a new norm. It will affect our industry dramatically, because they're saying that out of the people, all those people there that were saying they're going to work remotely, they're saying for about 2 to 2.5 days a week. They don't want to do 5 days. They don't want to do 1 day. So they're saying that's the sort of thing. So they're still going to want to go into the office, but of course, and they're saying that they're prepared to give up their desk and their space at the office to actually allow them to work remotely, which means that obviously the space could be halved in real effect. And bear in mind that the offices a lot of them were 40% empty previously. That kind of suggests that there could be quite an overcapacity at some stage once people start to realize and leases start coming to an end.
I think it's going to be less of a problem too in the smaller centers that are old school, that you can actually drive to. Like we're almost reversing everything that we've kind of achieved. We were moving towards the carless society, and now I think because the danger of rapid transit, so I think we're almost seeing that some of these assets are stranded in these mega cities because of you can't get there, and that's a concern, and that actually might, in the big picture, might end up seeing us repurpose some of those buildings for. I think Alper pointed out, it'd be nice if they went for manufacturing, or if they went for turning back into farms, and there's a whole bunch of radical changes. The mega city, I think, is the thing that's come under the most scrutiny because it has the biggest problem because of density. maybe a bit out of our scope, but I think the thing is we have to kind of understand some of the stuff that's going on because it's falling on us. This is the stuff that's hitting the fan, and some of the bits and pieces that are coming into our industry are these big dilemmas.
I don't think you're that far off, Ken, out of subject actually, because if all of a sudden those buildings, if they're asked to be repurposed or have a need to be repurposed, then that's going to involve our industry, right? And it's, you talk about farms or other things, or maybe they all turn into giant data centers, right? That don't need a lot of people. So I think one way or another, the thing to remember is our industry is going to be involved one way or another. It's involved even if they sit vacant for a long time. It's involved if they get repurposed. It's involved if they eventually get back to the same purpose even. I think we're involved. And the question really, and what we're trying to talk about today a little bit is, in those different scenarios, what are some of those best practices that kind of lead us forward towards that?
I think one thing that's evolving is the best practices are becoming very localized. Like what would be the best practice in New York will be quite different than what would be in Phoenix or Austin, because those communities are bikeable, walkable, drivable, and so therefore now the people can get to the buildings, then we can start coming up with some solutions. If we have the problems that the people can't get to the buildings and the density of the buildings is so such that we can't use the elevators, so we can't figure out how to physically distance people in elevators to get them all into the building and out of the building in the time. So I think you're going to see more area type solutions rather than generic solutions as we maybe have had in the past.
And don't you think that,
sorry. Go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, I was just going to say, don't you think that if the world's successful in coming up with a vaccine for COVID, that the social distancing challenge is going to go away like it is with the flu?
I think that's one of the point of actually thinking about it on a timeline basis, right? Because we don't know what the eventual new normal is, and I think the thing that's most difficult to figure out is the mass transport, whether it's trains or subway or buses or any of those that just that cannot work in a social distancing thing,
right?
Social distancing way, right? So nothing's going to get into any kind of normality until we either go back to some kind of what we had in normally before, if vaccine and other stuff, or if not, then there'll be a different normal. It was actually interesting, John, you distributed a link that I found fascinating, sort of comments from basically real estate people. Do you want to talk around that?
Yeah. Let me comment on that. And it's specific type of real estate people. As we work with lots of different, contractors, system integrators, engineers, building owners, et cetera. And I think, when you try to get together and have a conversation among business people, there has to be some component of people want to look at the positive side. I mean, right? We're all human. We have to, right? And so I think you see lots of good communication from real estate operators about here's what we're doing with the building. It's going to be safe. We're going to clean it. We're going to increase air change. Those are all good things that were actually kind of the focus of what we wanted to talk about today at best practices. What I thought was interesting about the articles I found, and I spent part of my week trying to gain all information from all these conflicting opinions. This article was from real estate investors, right? These are people who invest in real estate, not running it, not trying to attract you in the door and say it's safe. And I thought the most telling comment, which was woven through most of them, was, my advice is to wait until containment shows clear, consistent results. Yeah. Don't invest in real estate. And why that's important is the economic engine that would support the things we can do to make buildings better. If that economic investment isn't there, it doesn't matter that it's not happening. And these people don't have the same axe to grind in a way. They're advising investors and they're saying, sit it out until there's, containment, vaccine or whatever. And I think that's interesting from 2 points of view, because number one, just financially your risk, but number two, just from a personal point of view, I want all of this to go away. I'm tired of carrying a mask around. I'm tired of worrying about that. I'm tired of rushing through the supermarket because I feel like, I'm in a dangerous place, to get green beans, This is a pain in the neck. So I think the natural reaction of all of us is somebody come up with a miracle and solve it. And then that would unleash a lot of things, obviously, but also I think there would still be a desire and investment in best practices in building systems, right? So.
Yeah, the economic driver came out of that link that you shared massively, and that I think that speaks to Jim Lee. Your sort of view of all of this has always been not just in the future, but also in how buildings work today. It's always driven by how the economics work and how we build and install systems in buildings.
Yeah, I just wanted to key off that they're looking at it differently. Reading all of John's, that was a great article with the slideshow full of real estate investors. But the idea of equipment that's already there and best practices, I think core to that is getting a building connected and doing commissioning, and what we call either connected building commissioning or ongoing commissioning is in essence a best practice that our industry has been promoting for over a decade, and now seems like a good time where they might actually start looking at their buildings instead of deferring maintenance and thinking about growth, actually to keep that minimal operability of those office buildings they are going to open, to really start doing ongoing commissioning in a serious way. And to do that, that means they've got to connect the building up and control systems that aren't working, that are specific to pieces of equipment. They've got to upgrade those control packs, hopefully start thinking edge to cloud, how to use the new cloud abilities to do more storage. That's going to come to the fore as they take a fresh look at that. I really do think as the opening happens, our industry is going to be at the forefront of where investment starts.
I think that's true. And the other thing that's happening is we've been in an era for the last 10, 20 years where we've been increasing the density in all of our buildings. And all of a sudden now we're questioning as to the wisdom of doing that. And sort of in a simple example, like the schools, some of the schools here in Canada are looking at actually running a double shift. So basically they can half the students in the class, and basically what they'll do is half a day virtual, half a day classroom, and basically use the same facility. So this internal repurposing of the existing resources and assets is probably going to drive a lot of business for everybody.
Yeah, and pointing to one of
it's going to be hybrid. So I'm wondering what the hybrid economics looks like.
One of the articles John had said they offset each other. The people that want to spread out will need more office space, and the people that say we're not coming back, they want less office space. But some of those two trends moving together, to what degree do they offset each other?
Yeah, they're both true,
One of the things that's kind of interesting in this whole thing is the time element here, right? We talked about in some of our conversations, there are short-term solutions here, and then there's going to be some kind of long-term situation. I won't call it a solution. A lot of what we see right now, people are looking literally 6 feet in front of them, right? And a lot of the solutions that we're seeing out there that is catching the media's attention, especially, are more short-term type solutions. If you go back to the underlying premise of this, which is you know, there will come a day when there is some kind of a vaccine for this. Of course, we don't know a lot about that yet, right? How effective is it going to be? Is Corona going to mutate like the flu does every year? Are they going to be able to keep up? You know, is it 10%, 50, 90% effective? We don't know a lot of those things. So the importance of that statement is how much of what we have been experiencing in terms of things like working from home and social distancing and things like that are going to linger on past containment and a vaccine. And a lot of what drives that will be the effectiveness of all of that, right? So we really need, as an industry, I think, need to look at this in a couple of different use cases. There's a bunch of things we can do right now that are short-term kinds of things, and probably all of us on this screen would argue should have been doing all along in terms of better monitoring, better control, remote visibility, those kinds of things. But looking at what we can take out of the situation that we have right now, how much of that lingers and carries forward, and then what we can do as an industry, I think is what's really interesting. You know, it will return to some different place. And even if we have a completely successful vaccine, I would still argue that a lot of what we've now learned over the last 4 to 6 months here and being in this pandemic, some of that will linger through. Even the economic viability of working at home is arguably one of the biggest lessons learned. Once we remove that stigma that maybe existed at a lot of places, there are a lot of companies kind of liking that, right? So there will be things that carry through past a containment and vaccine. And some of that are some of these best practices that I know a lot of us here on the screen would like to see happen in terms of control systems and HVAC and so forth.
So obviously from a process perspective, it would be good to use this sort of COVID uncertainty period or COVID uncertain period to test things out, to try things, to figure out what works and what doesn't work.
I think the other thing too.
The best practice.
Go ahead, Roger.
Go ahead, Roger.
Yeah, so what I was going to say was that, we talked about a little bit before, is that this is the beginning of something that, there's no known best practice for some of the things we're looking at doing anyway, but we do need the data. Experiencing some of this, we talked about that on one of the first shows about, the data that we're going to collect to actually help us manage some of these things. But of course, that doesn't come to a little bit of time afterwards. But it's then trying to find the people who can interpret that data to actually set up the standards that should be put in place. And it's making sure that the industry, your people recognize that you're going to need someone to interpret that information to actually help you understand what you've got to do about your building, because they're all going to be different in different industries and different climates, geographies, and so on. And I think that's going to be important on who's going to be a guiding light, to actually help people who don't know who don't know what to do. They're actually looking for experts to do it. And whether the industry has enough experts, that's another thing.
So are there any, in terms of data analytics and looking at data to help determine the health of buildings, and we talked about that a little bit, are there any sort of results already, any sort of learnings that we've got yet in terms of what can actually help us determine how?
The only couple I'd seen was previous. Yeah, I saw one previously where there was a consultant, Bureau Happold, actually had were tracking people going around a building so you could see the traffic and see where congestion points were and things like that. But that's why I kind of sent out that's a remote working thing, because we don't have enough information at the moment, whereas people have just been through this experience and they're now did a survey with 3,000 people to actually say, okay, what next? And so you are starting to interpret the data to actually determine what does come next? What should be the next steps?
So
Ed, I'd like to make a few
few
points.
analytics.
I think
Just-
there'll be
I'm
more
just
use
wanna point-
of data to prove that you're doing a good job, right?
Right.
Instead of finding that you're not. I think,
Right.
you know, when you think about major, you know, energy performance contracts, somebody has to track that, right? There's monitoring and verification to make sure the investment paid off, right? Nobody argues with that. They collect the data, right? And then you think about sustainability and the different sustainability metrics out there, whether it's in Europe or in the US. Somebody has to track the data, whatever that data is. I think there's going to be a higher use of data to prove that, hey, I'm doing it right. I've got the right air changes. I'm maintaining what's expected. Doesn't guarantee anything, but people are going to need to do that just to protect their organizations from risk. And that, you know, that will be positive for the companies and industries involved in helping people use data, but it'll change from finding fault to proving good. So I think.
Yeah, so John, picking up on your point, one of the key things is that we have lots of data around, but is healthy air. But what does that mean?
Mhm.
So, you know, when you look at a weather report every day, particularly this time of the year, it'll tell you what the pollen situation looks like, and people have a relationship to that for sure, particularly if you got allergies. But in terms of indoor air quality, fine, you show a CO2 level or you show a volatile organic compound. What the hell does that mean? So what is healthy air? Is there, I think Roger, or maybe it was one of you guys was saying we need some way to, as an industry, to establish a standard around something as basic as healthy air, as clean air. What is that? What are we going to get behind saying that's the measurement of healthy air?
Jim Lee, I know that you want to chime in on the analytics side.
I do. First, I want to take Steve Fay's point, and I think maybe I'll have Jim Butler cover that, and I'd love to get back to analytics. But just in a nutshell, ASHRAE has been working on some serious science and some serious policy on indoor air quality and what these metrics should be. So let me turn it over to Jim Butler for a minute, and I'll come back to analytics after.
Okay.
Yeah, ASHRAE has an existing standard 62.1, which talks about indoor air quality. And they continue to promote its use even in the short-term disruption we have right now. But I want to make another point about standards, which is the value of standards depends on their perceived utility, right? I've been working on standards for more than 25 years. And, you know, if the end users think that your standard has value, then they'll apply it and it will be useful. But indoor air quality has not been one of those areas in which people have taken standards particularly seriously. Most of us spend most of our lives indoors, and we should take indoor air quality very seriously now and also in the future. And I'm certain that ASHRAE is going to be taking the research that they funded and NSF is funding right now, and they will use that to improve standards such as 62.1. But ultimately, it's up to the building occupants to demand that building owners provide systems that will enable those buildings to meet those standards.
There are a fair number of entrepreneurial bodies along the side of the road for people who invested in indoor air quality based businesses, counting on regulation to someday come. Potentially the COVID crisis will be a catalyst for finally getting that to happen. But as I said, a lot of people tried and a lot of people died along the way to that entrepreneurial venture. In terms of analytics, I think John's point is excellent, that analytics can be used to show what people are doing. Having been in the analytics business 20 years, one of the biggest problems that we've had up till now is a lot of people aren't that keen on people knowing how they're doing. And, you know, so I've been pondering that And you know what, I've told this joke to John before, but the best fault detection money can buy is the one that doesn't find fault. Or a lot of the people out there that aren't that excited about doing a good job. That said, what could we do to change the balance here to actually reward people that are doing a good job? And the answer is getting the tenants to understand that the data and these metrics are there and have them enforce it. Having the building managers, having the building owners care about this stuff is not really going to move the needle that much, because unless their customers do, they're not going to care. So I think our focus should be getting the end customers, the tenants, interested in what this means and understanding that, hey, these metrics are out there and this data is available. You know, why isn't your landlord giving you that data? Maybe because they're not trying to do a very good job, or they're not confident in the job they're doing. John, what do you think?
Yeah, I think trying to do that, that would help if we could get there. I thought one of the things was interesting before you got to that point. I was actually going to almost contradict it in following up on Steve's comment, because he was saying, how do you convey this? I think the first people we need to convey it to are the building owners, right? They do have people that understand that they should run their systems properly so that they're within the best band, right? I don't know if you can boil this down for the occupants, other than trying to do, you know, red, yellow, green. I guess you could do that. Remember, there was a product out there, another one with an arrow in its back, that was going to sit on your desk and just fly, you know, slowly flash green if everything's okay, and then transition to yellow and red, which would mean get out of your chair and leave the building, right? I just think the effort is monumental to reach, you know, kind of consumer level messaging. Right.
Maybe not
Right.
consumer
Yeah.
level, but maybe organizational behavior at you know, institutional organizational behavior, the APAs, the you know, professional associations, the I'm sorry, go ahead.
But the survey that Roger was referring to, right, that has an opinion about going back to work, which can be implied to have an opinion about buildings, is something that we've not seen before, because we've not seen people care about the buildings. They just walk in and out buildings all day long, and they don't really think about it. But now they have to think about it. So that seems to be a sort of an opportunity to open that up as being a mechanism. But you're right, it may need to be reduced down to red, yellow, green kind of a thing.
Actually, the document that Mark Peacock circulated from WeWork was also a first for an actual client to actually write down some of these parameters. So I don't know if anybody took a look at that.
Yeah, but you know, the
Right,
tenant,
I guess to John's point.
I was just going to say, Ken, I think that's good, but I think that's very focused on the short term, because WeWork is presumably very concerned about getting people back in. So again, it's kind of a short term versus eventual solution thing. But Anna, I think you were trying to say something.
yeah, I mean, the tenant's been, for many, many, many years, they only care of three things, right? The temperature is 72 degrees, the doors are locked, and the lights are on, right? And in fact, if the building system is operating like it should, I should never know that it's there. Right?
But do you think this will happen perhaps a little bit more over time? I mean, that the tenants are going to get some pressure from their staff maybe to change things, and it'll only be, they may do some theatre in keeping the place clean and stuff to change their lease, which may come up in the next year. So they're going to be looking for buildings with the facilities in that they would be expecting, and that might drive it. So it'll be a longer process over the next 2 to 3 to 5 years, where people are looking for new things or the right things in their building. They'll look at it and say, hey, I've got a year left on my lease. What do I need to do to actually meet the minimum? But when I do move, I'm going to want this, you know, I want better air quality. I want touchless, you know, lifts and doors and all the other good things. I'm just wondering whether it will take a longer time to do rather than sort of be instantaneous.
Isn't that where, I mean, the REITs that get that message are going to be going after those lease people, right? They're going to be adding the additional capabilities to their list of services that they provide.
Yep.
And I think that'll definitely drive They'll
So,
definitely drive the leases and the tenants.
Tracy?
At least
I
the
think you're right.
so
more
essentially, Rick LeBlanc, look at smog. When you look at, sorry, if I could just finish my point, when you look at smog, you know, when LA has an inversion, the smog levels go up. And to John's point about red, you know, red, yellow, green, if we had something similar for indoor air quality, green means it, because there's so many components to IAQ potentially. So any one of them could send it into yellow or even red potentially. So, but if you have that relative sense of my IAQ is green, good, I don't have to worry about it. The specific cause of why it went to yellow, well, that's up to the facilities people to understand what caused it to tip over. But as a tenant, I just want to know that it's green. I want to get that's good for me to be in the building. I don't have to worry about it.
That goes back to the simple model, right? From a tenant, if the lights aren't on, I know I can complain. If the door doesn't lock, I know I can complain. I don't want a complicated IAQ. Is it good or bad?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Why is my desk blinking?
That
red?
could,
Oh, no, why?
right.
Yeah, fix it.
Right.
And that may differ in different scenarios. Going back to, I think Ken was making the point between big cities and rural areas. I don't know how the healthy air would be different, but the situations around the things could be different. That will actually drive different data to trigger the green or to trigger the yellow, right?
Well, I think one thing the virus has done is it's basically made us aware of how we're all connected globally and how our food supplies are all connected as well, and the actual distribution of all of that. So I think there's a much greater reasoning for people to ask questions and also to anticipate the next virus. I think you kind of think this is going to end. I think it's just a canary that's flowing across our screens. The whole this, you know, what's gone on here and the way the world reacted is not going to go away. We're going to see this is going to have an effect. So we're always going to have to prove, you know, where some of this stuff is, the people that are actually supplying the products. It's going to get into a much bigger arena.
Yeah,
So I guess the
wanna
red, yellow, green needs some standards. I was wondering if the ASHRAE standard that you mentioned, Jim Butler, is that enough, or is that just a little bit of the standards we need, or is there a lot more? How do we get this device? How do we get this traffic light work? Healthy traffic lights.
Yeah, I don't think that the ASHRAE standard is really designed to go to red, yellow, green, and in fact, it does not take into account everything that I think that we're eventually going to care about. The ASHRAE standards are targeted mainly at buildings professionals, so we'll need more of a consumer-oriented view to get to red, yellow, green, I believe.
And also, like, is it real time, or is it, how long it is red? If it is red for 5 minutes, it might be okay. You might want to skip that. And how long it is red is going to be, which areas are red. It's going to be, we need to look into those in perspective as well. And I mean, the technologies that are out there, we can do it right now. I mean, yeah. It is out there.
Mm-hmm.
I was just going to say that the technologies have been out there, but it's been very hard to pitch to the building owner. But one of the things COVID seems to do is to change the negotiations that go on in the value chain are shifting in their power base. One of the articles we shared last week is like Starbucks is saying, you know, we have leases in so many of these buildings, but don't expect us to pay the same rent going forward, Mr. Building Owner. And I think that it might become easier now to pitch to a Starbucks, and to put that pressure on the building owners to say, well, for our part of the building, we want this green, yellow, red, however we're going to package analytics, but making that enterprise sale to somebody like a Starbucks comes to mind. And in terms of the influence of the tech companies, like LinkedIn owns a floor or has long-term leased a big floor of the Empire State Building. That's probably one of the better buildings in terms of controls and upgrades, because they were so open about saying what a great job they did a few years back retrofitting it. But would LinkedIn, as renting a floor of the Empire State Building, be the person that you might start pitching to if you did have that red, green, yellow, rather than to the owner of the Empire State Building? It's just a question I have. I see a shifting.
But a red, green, yellow device or mechanism is very simple. It probably could, if it has validation of the industry and maybe this industry and validation and believability from the occupant's perspective, that becomes a very easy thing to sell to a building owner, whether it's a REIT or anything, right? If it becomes a standard, the same way that red, yellow, green is a standard in traffic lights, for example.
Ultimately,
something that we can try and shoot for.
there needs to be an economic return in whatever direction we take here. So until we get it to a point where either a big tenant like a Starbucks or LinkedIn or somebody like that says, I'm not going to rent from you unless, then this is going to be kind of difficult for us to push forward, I think.
Well, the other model is, with so many tenants leaving buildings, REITs are desperate to get tenants in. I mean, they use it as a tool to attract, new tenants.
Yeah, I could see some progressive owners, it's going to be the same bell curve that we see, right? There's going to be 20% of the owners that are going to be ahead of the curve, and they'll do that. They'll use it to their advantage to be proactive about attracting customers for that. And then there'll be the majority that will lag behind that and wait and see and be primarily reactive to everything. And then there'll be some that just never do it.
Right.
So.
As a risk management, is that something the building owner wants to put these devices in there and then have the possibility that it's red, but it was showing green and have a problem? Or do they want to push that to their client? Is that like a tenant improvement? Basically, I think we're starting to see the evolution that our industry might walk across the floor, whereas it now exists. We deal with the building owners. I think we actually may see a new rising industry that will come from dealing with the large clients that are concerned and want us to do as much as we can. But this whole risk management, I think it was last week we talked a bit about that, but that starts to enter into it. I can't imagine the biggest problem I would as a building owner is just a minute, am I liable if these things don't work?
Well, it's a double-edged sword even when they do work properly. I think the point before, right? If you have the data, it's now subject to subpoena. I've had customers tell me that before, right?
Yep.
So if you don't have the data, then prove that I didn't have good indoor air quality, So it's kind of double-edged sword when it comes to risk management from that standpoint.
Like we're starting to see in the restaurant business up here, what you're involved in, Tracy, is I think you're probably seeing the same thing is we're taking over the streets. Basically, we're shutting down parking spaces or shutting down streets. And to get the social distancing, basically the restaurants are just spilling out onto the streets, which is actually turns out to be kind of a nice touch. So
yeah, that's a good thing, Ken.
Practical, yeah, very good.
So the concept of having a traffic light on the entrance door of the restaurant or a building or an office or something. So that you have a
doesn't that also then extend? But if you've got if you do see the red, yellow, green, what do you do about it, right? If you're in the building or going to the restaurant and it's showing as yellow or red, does it mean I shouldn't go in? Do I call somebody? What's
Well,
my
I
action?
mean, we all, certainly in the US, we all have to wait outside the grocery store and restaurants increasingly now before we can go in, right? And there's usually somebody doing that, right? So maybe there just needs to be a red, green light outside of the Starbucks and that tells me basically to wait outside until it goes green, then I can go inside. In other words, it's safe. It's not safe just because there's no virus or temperature or whatever, but it's safe because of a number of people in there, right?
But
A
again,
number of people in the building.
that shift is now that's controlled by the owner of the building, the grocery shop or Starbucks, is basically in Starbucks you basically order online and you they tell you when your order's ready, or they actually bring it out to you. So now the client has taken over, the renter has taken over this whole automation relationship and some of the issues. So I think we're going to start to see a shift of that from the building owner. The building's going to go back to just renting a building, maybe, I don't know.
Well, I kind of, you can draw a parallel here to like the food safety, or inspection scores that restaurants have on the windows, right?
Yes.
And that started, interestingly, by the death of a relatively small number of people compared to what we're facing today. But it also took literally decades to get fully implemented. If you chase back the history to the first, I think it was Jack in the Box that happened to. And, there could be an element to this. Right now, listening to everybody and thinking about this, I kind of see two paths of entry here, two avenues for us to sort of have something like this take hold. One is through the building ownership side of things, where it's necessary in order to attract tenants, or through the tenant side of things, especially on the retail side, where it becomes a competitive advantage, where they can put something up that says, look, my buildings are safer, cleaner. You don't have to worry if you're coming to do business with us. So I don't know which is the better avenue, to be honest, but unless there's a return there on one side or the other, or the third, I guess, back to something that Elper said a few weeks ago, government regulation, right? Which is where we are with the food safety part of it. If there's government regulation to do something like this, it will happen. So.
But that tends to be fractured how that happens, right? I mean, in a big country like US, that's going to take years.
Yeah.
Right. So it'll happen in states. But if there was an industry norm of just simple red, yellow, green lights that you put on top of a door, say, maybe we can do that.
Hey, Anto, can I suggest we maybe stop on this particular conversation and,
Sure.
and go on to other best practices that folks have, since we're running short on time? Not that I want to be.
So you've got the mic. You got the mic. You go ahead.
Well, the only I had in my in the presentation deck, I just had a reference to how contractors could prove their health coming back into a building by taking a health survey. So we recognize that people coming and going, and particularly contractors, want to provide some assurance to the building owner that they're taking COVID seriously and are following best practices. So we took our platform and have created a health risk survey that any contractor could take. It doesn't take, the software is free, but it also provides a management tool for the owner to have, so the owner knows who's come in the building and who's and what shape they're in. So it allows them to really put their policies out around health to any visiting contractor and ensure that that individual is attesting to that policy. So that's it's just there as it's one little tool among the many tools I think people need to feel good about coming into buildings.
Have you had any
you're
feedback from
interested-
that yet?
Well,
Or is it too
well,
early?
the feedback has all been around organizations that are very interested in it, and they're just waiting for us to release it. So all we've been able to do up to this point is show the concept, and the software itself is getting into production here in early June. So then the proof will be once it's out and how people respond to it. But we thought it made sense to have something, a tool like this that was really oriented towards our industry specifically and to managing contractors' health.
You know, along that line, I don't know if anyone on here has seen, but one of our partners that we do business with is it's our Asian sales rep actually has connections and came to us and offered us a line of PPE that we could offer. And what we decided to do with that is we're offering that at cost out with the sole. There is a selfish reason that we're doing this. We're trying to get contractors back to work, to your point, Steve. And so we're starting to offer that out at cost for people. And that's an important part of this. The supply chain was so fractured. There are so many people trying to take advantage of this situation and turn a profit on this. We decided a better long-term play for us would be try to help get contractors back to work. So that's another initiative I know, and I'm sure we're not the only ones out there doing that, but there are a number of companies out there kind of doing that sort of a thing that could go hand in hand with the health survey part of that. I don't mean to commercial, like I said, we're not making money from this at all. It's about trying to move the industry forward. So
yeah, that was our,
So
our
any
same
other-
idea, Tracy. Yep.
Yeah. Any other sort of practices that you guys have seen or have done that's either worked or hasn't worked? Because something not working is just as valuable.
There's I just posted something in the chat to a company called Safer.me in Singapore that's actually doing contact tracing, how you enter exit buildings, kind of interesting stuff as well. Which allows them to, part of that is also to, if there is an incident, they've got a good instant record of all the people and all the contacts that were at that particular point in time, and to do a trace back and do a quick response. It's kind of interesting. It's all phone-based, app-based.
One of the things that we've talked about in some of the past calls is that there's not a silver bullet to this, right? So when we don't say best practice today, we say best practices. And there are a number of things I think that in some of the reading I've been doing, and even the articles that have been shared among us about some of those things in terms of, the proxies that we can put in place to measure. There's no COVID sensor, right? So what can we do to sort of measure that? And if we can't even have exact numbers or measurement, I think we can all agree that directionally there are best practices. More air turns, better filtration, monitoring CO2, those kinds of things that are really easy, basic stuff. And then you start to layer on some of the things that a lot of us have been involved with over the past years in terms of collecting more data and sensing and measuring and getting more information about what's going on with the facility and the system. And then using that data somehow, I think directionally, it's hard to argue against that, right? Along with remote connectivity and the ability to see things without having to send contractors on site all the time or extra times, let's say. Just to throw that out there, I don't know if anyone wants to add to that list, but those are the things that we're looking at trying to promote to our customers and our building owners as much as possible.
Well, you're talking to a more generic approach to, I guess I can remember someone else mentioned earlier, this isn't the first one, right? We've had SARS, we had MERS. It's going to happen probably with a higher frequency. So, the more that we can do that can be reapplied, unfortunately, to the next time is really the value, right?
Yes, yes.
Right, and I was just saying, when we talk about red, green, yellow, there's also, we had Karen on from, it wasn't Building Fit, but Healthy Buildings, I think the Joe Allen version. But just like LEED gave us platinum, gold, silver, how close is our red, green, yellow idea to what they're trying to, and already there's 2 standards, at least Building Fit and Healthy Buildings, that are sort of looking at this problem and seeing how they could put metrics around it, measure it.
So comparing that, that's kind of interesting because LEED is about the building itself, right? It doesn't change, right? So the stuff that we're talking about with the red, green, yellow is kind of more real time. So that's one of the difference on that. So Mark, Scott, you've been very quiet. You want to contribute any best practices from your perspective? Either one of you?
I'm good, Anto.
Okay.
Not today. Thank you.
A quick question first, really, is where do the FM guys sit in all this? I mean, they kind of sit in between the end user and the end user tends to push down to him to look after his buildings. But are these guys going to have to be the ones that implement it? Because we talk about the REITs, we talk about the building owners, we talk about the occupants or the tenants, but the FM guys tend to be in the middle there, and they're possibly going to be responsible for applying a lot of what we're talking about in some of the bigger facilities.
Are they not more tactical? They just do the stuff and
I know, but they kind of, I mean, they cut margins to the minimum, don't they? And they will do whatever. But here's a chance for them to actually, I guess, get some more revenue by selling additional services to their customers. And the customer's going to be possibly looking to them to, as we're talking about. But, I don't know, I'm just asking the question, where do we see those guys much talking about this at the moment, really? And because they are very diverse, sort of from very large to very small groups of, changing over from maintenance, FM people, and can usually tend to be almost like the mechanical contractor. They want to cut everything down to the minimum, but this is an opportunity for them to actually bring something to their customers.
Yeah, to your point, Roger, we've had with one of the very largest of the property management firms, we've shown them the health risk survey that we did, and they're quite interested in it. So for that reason, they want to have something proactive they could take to their clients.
Okay, so it's just past 4 o'clock here on the East Coast. Maybe we should have a round of just concluding comments about what we've talked about. Anyone want to chime in? Want to start?
Well, Anto, I'd like to promote this book, which I had nothing to do with, but I found it to be a very interesting read so far. Healthy Buildings, written by 2 Harvard University professors who, before they became professors, had a lot of experience in the buildings industry.
What's the cliff note? What's the sort of angle that is it too big to?
Well, we're not paying enough attention to indoor air quality, and they have some very specific recommendations for how we can look at it, both from a scientific perspective, but also from an economic perspective, which I think will be of interest to many of the people who are listening in today.
That's great, Jim.
Thank you. Any others?
I just want to say that's Joe Allen's book, the Harvard guy who writes all the articles in Washington Post, and who Karen came on Healthy Buildings. It's all one org. And it's not static like LEED was. I think they are thinking, because it is the LEED people have moved into this well building, that they've learned that lesson. But that's all, lots of good stuff out of it.
I would go back to just say something a little bit. I think this is going to be more of a hare and tortoise type thing. I think there's going to be a lot of theatre at the beginning, but I think it's going to take some time, as your original chart showed there, Anto, for some of these things to be implemented. It's going to take, you know, good 2-3 years to actually really take effect.
Yeah, I'm getting a lot of uptick from end users on give me answers, give me ideas, give me solutions. Even if it's theatre at this point in time, I need something. I'm starting to panic. You know, my tenants aren't coming back, that type of thing. So getting a lot more uptick specifically in the space of just give me something. What can I do?
I think the space is going to get a lot more complicated, which is kind of hard to believe because it's pretce complicated now. But the fact that it's going to be sliced and diced with the remote workforce, we see the negative part of that. But there's a positive part if, in fact, the office buildings and government buildings and everything start to turn more into a hotel type environment. This tracking of people. When you go to a restaurant now, it's quite common for them to ask for your name and number, even if they don't have a sophisticated system. They basically are up in Canada, they're obligated to do that if they open. So some of this is starting to ripple through. More complications, more sophisticated systems having to be overlaid on existing buildings. But again, I'm sort of seeing a shift towards where that used to be the building owner's problem. I think they will probably try and wriggle out of it. I think I would if I was a building owner, and try and make it the leasee problem. It's a lease improvement to put in these systems. So that could create almost a brand new market for us. People actually buying automation systems and or asking to interface with existing building systems because they're trying to achieve a particular, a different type of control. The other thing that's kind of wound into all of this is we were moving, we got caught up a while back on the 330, 300 rule, and then they dropped the 3000 rule on us. And of course the 3 was utilities and the 30 was costs, leaseholds, taxes and stuff like that. And the 300 was the cost of the employee. And then what happened is they pointed out that some of the productivity of some of the employees was way beyond, if you're Zuckerberg and you're sitting in an office, it's much more important to provide services. There's some other stuff moving. It seems that some of that where they tended to be in the head office, that may not be the new model. So they may move some of that intellect and high-priced help out. That may mean building a smaller sub building in a small town outside. Could be a whole bunch of repositioning, recreation of space and stuff. So I think you're going to see, as always, everything gets more automated. It'll be the best of times, I'm sure. It's just you're going to have to. It's not going to be like it was. It's going to be different. And you're going to have to go and research and reinvent and just try and find out where your new business is. And I'm sure it'll be there, and it may even be bigger than it is now.
That was actually an interesting point, Ken. That was something that's happening in Asia, APAC market already, where a lot of the tech companies are splitting up their teams into 3 separate teams, and they're going in offices, different rotations, so that they're not exposing the complete team to any potential issue. And if one team comes down, then they lock down that team and, can rotate it around. So I'm seeing tenants are starting to do their own organizational changes to respond accordingly.
I think we had this privacy thing too, was a big stumbling block. It's no way you're going to track where I go. And it's just simply said back again now is if we don't track where you go, you don't go. So get over it.
Yeah, the compartmentalizing the risk is one, and the spaces are getting emptier, but they might expand out to keep more people in. But there's still going to be empty spaces, and there's a huge unemployment too. So that will be an issue along with that. To get more people into the space, I think getting some manufacturing in, which can be automated where the costs are affordable, will be needed in order to get back the industry. So a mixed use of space for services and production, which could be 3D printing or PCB manufacturing, will be needed in small scales to keep the spaces busy. Yeah.
Repurposing of
Okay,
almost
so I think
everything.
Yeah.
that kind of goes back to, I can't remember who was saying that earlier, that almost whatever happens in the new normal, there's a role for us, there's a role for automation and controls and monitoring things. So I think maybe we should close this today's show on that happy note.
All right. Thanks.
And thank you all again, and thanks for our the audience and for the questions and comments. And we'll see you next week. And a video of this will be on YouTube sometime later on today. So thank you all.
And Teresa's 3 for 3.
All right.
Bye bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.